mi gente, your boy Skyy John here today with Josh Fisher. Tell us who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, my name is Josh Fisher. I'm a scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I look at Earth. A lot of people don't realize that NASA looks back at Earth. They know us as looking at Mars and black holes and things like that. But we actually have more satellites orbiting around this planet than any other planet and looking back.
Okay, but explain that, because when you think NASA, NASA stands for National Aeronautics and Space Association.
Close. Good enough. You had space in there. Administration.
Administration. Okay, administration. So my thing is, and you guys still look back at Earth? Why?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we look at all the planets. Earth is another planet. We Earth scientists at NASA like to say it's the best planet because it has 100% of the taxpayers on it. But we're trying to understand all the planets, including Earth, and it's within our mandate at NASA to look at Earth. And so, in some ways, it's actually easier to look at Earth because you don't have to send your satellites as far out as to Mars or whatever. In other ways, it's more complicated because Earth is much more complicated than a lot of other planets.
Because these other planets are uninhabited.
I mean, if you look at Mars, we're interested in Mars, but it's mostly rock, right? And so whereas here we've got this breathing biosphere of trees and plants and ocean, atmosphere swirling around, all these gases, humans doing all sorts of different things. And so when we try to understand how Earth functions, it's really complicated.
So you're an ecoscientist. As an ecoscientist, that's really what? What is it truly? What are you looking at exactly?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a scientist, right? And I look at ecosystems, plants, soils, water, agriculture. And I got into it because I was interested in science, and I couldn't pick a science. I liked biology, I liked chemistry, I liked physics. And I looked for a science that allowed me to combine different sciences together. And you could do that in like a pre-med, or you can do that in environmental sciences. I thought, environmental science would be a good way to connect all these sciences together, and I get a chance to get outside now and then. And then as I was going through my schooling, climate change blew up in our face, and you really need this intersection of different sciences to tackle such a complicated and interconnecting problem such as climate change. So in graduate school, in my PhD, I started playing with satellites, NASA satellites, mostly because they're cool toys in the sky. Then, I was able to look at big systems of the Earth and how it moved around. And I'm from Los Angeles originally. I spent some time in Alaska. And so growing up in LA, we have a lot of droughts, a lot of, water issues. And so I was interested in looking at water, and water as a cycle, as it moved through like energy through a system. And being able to track that from space. And so I was doing that in my PhD and was able to come up with ways to be able to do that. And then at about the same time, climate change, exploded onto the scene. And I was looking at big cycling of Earth processes using the latest in technology at a time when we really needed to study what was happening to our Earth because of the changing climate.
So you mentioned water. Are we in trouble water-wise? Like, will we run out of water? Does it look that way?
That's a great question. All your questions are great, but not to kiss up to the interviewer. Water is important for your other show, The Tipsy Bartender, right? Because you don't have water, you don't have that show, right? You just got a bunch of sugar.
I need that for my ice cubes.
You just got a bunch of sugar, So water is the fundamental, I would say, most important aspect of climate change. We hear a lot about polar bears or this and that. But water fundamentally is what's changing the most because of climate change. We're trapping more energy in the Earth system because of our greenhouse gases, CO2 and other things. And that energy accelerates the water cycle, makes it more energetic, makes it hyper. It's like giving a kid candy, on Halloween. They're just bouncing off the walls, knocking stuff over, crying, laughing. And that's what we're doing to the Earth system. We're driving these superstorms more frequently. They're bigger. These droughts get more, bigger. And so our water cycle, which we as humans would prefer to be just kind of relatively chilled out, right? Just predictable year to year, is now becoming much more unpredictable, much more variable. And that's a big problem. It's kind of like Goldilocks. You don't want it too hot. You don't want it too cold. You want it just right. You want a good amount of water. You have too little water, you're in a drought. You have too much water, you're in a flood. And so you want just that perfect amount of water, and that requires a very stable climate.
And we don't have that. So our water supply is somewhat in jeopardy, would you say?
Absolutely. So if you look at just us in California, a few years ago, we almost ran out of water. We had 1 year of surface water left.
One year.
Yeah. So, flash to the cool slides that you guys will edit in. I'll show you that, there's these, you can see our reservoirs, in 2013 all filled up, in 2014 completely decimated. And so not only were we losing water, and this is happening all over the world, where you've got, in Denmark, you've got all these fields and agriculture that was really happy, and the next year just completely decimated because they ran out of water. So in California, where we're living, we get most of our water from the snowpack. That's our reservoir because it doesn't rain in the summer here, and so that snow melts, and we use that water for when we're growing our food the most in the summer, right, when it's nice and sunny and warm. And that snow's going away because it's warming, and we're over pumping our groundwater, so we don't have that. And so, our water issues are basically that tipping point for a lot of critical regions. In a place like California, we are pretty rich, right? We can buy, our food from elsewhere. We can buy water. We can support our farmers when they can't grow. In other places of the world, they can't.
Yeah.
And so that becomes a big tipping point in terms of geopolitical migrations and conflicts that start with a climate spark.
Did you watch the movie The Big Short? You know what I'm talking about? It covered the Florida housing crisis.
Yeah.
Why I brought that up is because the guy who was the one that kind of predicted the whole housing collapse, one of the few guys who walk away with a bunch of money from that, he my understanding is, well, after the show, he only invests in water-related stuff now because he understands that water is going to be the next gold.
Yeah.
You see that happening?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, again, a lot of my examples, sorry for your international viewers, are like California bias. But, California, water in California is a big deal, right? Especially for agriculture. You need that water. And so not only are agricultural producers worried about growing their crops, they're worried about their water. And they buy water as much as they buy seeds and fertilizers and things like that. And they'll buy water and store water in water banks, like going to the bank, right? But there's these areas where you can buy water, move water, deposit it in like the ground in these like aquifers that hold the water, and then they can like suck it back out or sell it. And so water trading and water buying and selling is huge.
Really? How the hell did I get into this? I didn't know. How would I even get into that? Is this these is publicly traded stocks?
I don't know. I'm not a stock market expert. Otherwise, I'd be rich and not talking to you, man. No, I'm just kidding. I'm teasing it.
So, okay, sea level's rising, but we now have desalination plants, right?
Sure, yeah.
So does that kind of balance this out? As the water begins to disappear, we just process more seawater?
Can we just desal our way out of it? Desal is a really nice option for getting some fresh water out of salt water. But how do you get that salt out of the water? It's not easy. It takes a lot of energy.
Oh, really?
That salt is bound to the water really well. So you have to spend an enormous amount of energy, which costs money, or you pollutes the environment if it's coal or oil, or you got to figure out where to get your solar or your wind from. But it takes a lot of energy to get that salt out of the water. And so the desal that we see can support, me filling up this cup of water or us in an urban city environment. But most of the water is not used by urban environments. Again, another California example. 80% of the water used in California is used by agriculture, not by cities, not by golf courses and people's lawns and toilets and flows. And yes, we have to do our part everywhere to think about wasting our resources. But ultimately, for us to drink this water is one thing, but you need to now have your plants that are growing your lettuce or your orchards or whatever, taking that water every day, and a lot of it fields beyond the size of cities, right? So it's a whole nother order of magnitude in terms of the water that's used to grow food versus what we're consuming here.
So in watching one of your speeches, I didn't know this. I don't know if I learned this and missed was supposed to know this, but you showed that like plants actually produce water. Am I correct with that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, they cycle water. They cycle water. So they don't produce water, but they use the water from rain, right, or whatever's in the soil, and they use it just like us. Life requires water, right? That's our big thing. So.
But in your example that I saw, like the leaves look as if they were putting water out.
Right, but that came from the soil. So it's a straw. They're straws.
Okay.
So they'll suck it up with their roots, and then spit it out through their leaves back to the sky. Back to the Skyy John. And so, so they're not producing it, but they're using it. And so they need it as much as we do. And so what we do from NASA and with this mission called EcoStress that I'm the science lead for, we just launched it to the International Space Station in 2018. We're looking at how much water plants are using and needing and how stressed out they are if they're not getting that water. And that's exactly critical. Because some plants use more water than others. They're more efficient with their water. And so if there's a drought, guess who's going to die first? The less efficient plants. And so it's kind of like if you and I were to run a race, right? You might need more water than I, or might need more water than you. And as we start to run out of water, of course, to the end of the race, someone's going to start to falter in that race. And the race is in life here for the ecosystems of the planet.
You just mentioned like eco stress. These plants are stressed out. Do you feel like plants are intelligent? Because a lot of people, I know they talk about your fungi being intelligent.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well,
about
you
that?
seem pretty intelligent.
Not really.
You
though.
seem like a fun guy. There we go. You're a fun guy. There we go.
Science joke.
There we go. Science joke, people. Science. I'll keep my day job. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. So, so we like to anthropomorphize plants and animals and cups. Oh, yeah, my cup talking. So, ultimately, it's a good way to, I say, oh, plants are feeling stressed. They're feeling stressed. But they've evolved, right? They've evolved through adaptation, survival of the fittest, and there's things that work that makes it look like they're making decisions. So one interesting aspect is that big trees will support their younger trees, or even competing species that are around them, and they'll have these deep roots, and while everyone's running out of water at the surface, they might tap some deep groundwater way below. They'll bring that water up, and they won't actually use it. Then they'll just spit it out to the surface through their shallow roots, allowing their seedlings to use it and survive, and maybe some of their competing species. So then we say, well, are they nurturing their young, or it could just be that that's how they survived, because trees that didn't do that didn't survive. And so they had a mutation and adaptation along the evolutionary way that just did that, and then they survived when the other species didn't.
What do you think? You think they're nurturing their young?
No.
Okay.
But I still use that phrasing because it gets people like emotionally connected. It's good to have that too. But we have to be real sometimes with the science. But there are also interesting things with the fungi too, right? The fungi are the communication. That's another one, right? Communication are plants signaling to their neighboring trees that there's a locust infestation or some sort of beetle infestation. And yes, they do, but it's not like they're like, oh shit, I gotta text my buddies, right? They're like, they evolved to do this, and the trees that sent out these signals and the trees that were sensitive to the signals survived when the other species didn't. So there's these communication.
How would they react though? I mean, give me an example. Like, so there's some kind of beetle infestation.
Yeah.
So what kind of signal is sent?
Yeah, so it's chemical. So they'll like emit these chemicals into the air. And then, if you're a leaf on a tree, on another tree, and you get this chemical, you'll react, and then you can put on defensive compounds. You can suddenly increase like the waxiness of your leaves, or put on these. You can actually, as a tree, emit other chemicals that the beetles don't like, or will kill the beetles. And so, I guess the question is, why aren't trees out doing this all the time, right? Because it takes resources, right? They have to build this. That's the sugars that they create from photosynthesis can be used for, it's like money. How do you spend your money? And trees have to decide how to spend their sugar money. Do they spend it on building new roots, getting taller, new leaves, seeds, fruits, defensive compounds. And so if they spent it all on defensive compounds, they might not grow, right? Because they're not spending on growth. Or they might not grow on roots to get more water. So it's these optimality decisions.
So you need a good accountant in there.
You need a good accountant. It's a total economy. And that's why you have people who do well with their economics, and people who don't. And it's kind of a conservative liberal principle, too. Why do we have conservative and liberal people? It's the same as it's the same in plants. There are conservative plants and there are liberal plants. And it usually is because of evolutionary history, their life history. Plants that are used to droughts know that they get over it really quick, and they're like, all right, let's just keep using water. We know the rain will come again. Other plants will be like, no, we'll be more conservative because, the droughts are less frequent or more frequent. And so there's these life histories that's why not all plants function the same way. That's why not all humans function the same way.
Okay, so right now you have all these movements where guys are going out there and planting trees. We have a YouTuber, Mr. Beast. I think he's planted something like 20 million trees with the help of Elon Musk. Is that something that really helps the climate, or that's too little, too late?
Both, right? So plants are our number one CO2 drawdown mechanism. It's our vacuum cleaner. It's our mop of the sky to suck out the CO2. And so we've got to have those trees and those plants around. But the CO2 that we're sending up isn't like, we chop down a tree and then we plant a tree and bring it down. It's not one for one. We aren't burning trees anymore. We are burning the accumulation of thousands of trees and, dead animals that have grown over thousands of years, compressed into a tiny ball of coal and oil that we burn like that, right? So to plant a tree in that place is one of the thousands of trees in place. It's not a one for one. And so it's not going to solve that, it's not going to take out all the CO2, but it is one mechanism and one of the primary mechanisms to do it.
Okay. Because I see in terms of getting CO2 out of the air, they're now, I don't know what they're called, but I see these big machines out in the middle, right, and they kind of suck it out and pump it into the ground.
Yeah.
Does that actually work, though?
I mean, so there's a lot of what we call geoengineering solutions. Can we just continue, life is normal, and just like suck that CO2 out of the sky and, put it somewhere where it doesn't come out again? So there's a lot of questions and issues around that. Can we create these vacuums that are big enough? And the vacuums require energy. So are we burning coal to suck out the coal? It's kind of like chasing our own tail in some ways. And also, this is the Earth, and like, how big are these machines? They're like,
the one I saw it on some documentary, and it was freaking huge.
Like as big as a building.
Yeah, it was a huge building.
Right,
yeah.
A huge building or a warehouse, but that's still small relative to the Earth, right? And so, if we think about even just where we live on land, everything you see that just seems your entire world, that's only a small fraction of the Earth. Most of the Earth is ocean.
Right.
So it's kind of hard for humans to like wrap their head around the scales between let's build this massive vacuum or this massive solar array or whatever it is, but then the atmosphere is like just looks down and laughs at you and says, don't even touch that.
It's wasting time. Yeah.
So that's one of the issues, or a couple of the issues. Another issue is, if you are able to suck it down, where do you put it?
Yeah.
Like, where do you put it where it doesn't just come back up again?
Because if you put it in the ground, it eventually comes out,
It might just come back out again. Right. Exactly. So the oil in coal that we're getting is way deep down there in these aquifers, right? Otherwise, it would have come out or whatever. So, there's not a lot of places to put it. There's other ideas for geoengineering, like.
By the way, break down what geoengineering is for the audience.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I throw the term out there just as a term.
I'm familiar with it, but I just learned recently what that is.
It's basically to describe building stuff to like to solve the climate crisis. That's basically it. Can we build our way out of it?
Can we build our way out of it?
Can we build a robot that like just like a Roomba of the sky that just like. And doesn't get like stuck on, like some.
Is that possible though? Because I've heard some theories of guys throwing some kind of reflective particles into the atmosphere to reflect the sun's lights back so that the Earth doesn't heat up.
Right. So lots of interesting ideas, things like that. Space mirrors, painting the roof white. There's an idea of putting iron, like iron clippings, on the ocean, and it allows algae and plankton to kind of grow, and they suck down the CO2, and then they die and sink to the bottom of the ocean. So now you've got a large area drawing CO2, and you don't have to deal with the storage issue because they just sink to the bottom of the deep ocean. So that's an interesting idea.
But
then
won't something eat that? And then you end up eating iron?
Exactly, exactly. So that's the question. Like, what about all that iron that you've just put out there? Is it gonna like disrupt the fisheries? Are you gonna you're gonna eat it? Like, is it gonna suddenly we're gonna become Iron Man? Like, you got some good guns there, Skyy, but like, or is it just gonna go to your brain instead and like knock you out?
Yeah.
Right? You'd rather go to the biceps.
Right.
Yeah, big questions, and it's important to have people thinking about these ideas. Anyone can think of an idea, but then you have to think about scale and like ramification.
Okay, have any of the geoengineering suggestions so far seemed plausible to you? Like something that you heard and you go, wow, this shit could actually work?
No.
Okay, we have a lot to look forward to.
So, I mean, we should definitely keep pursuing them. The vacuums that suck CO2 out, again, but these issues of like, where do you store it and the scale and things like that. Iron fertilization of the ocean. Maybe test it out on small scale, see what happens. We have to do something. We have to continue exploring, but we have to understand the ramifications of them.
But you can see in the future where someday we will be able to control the weather.
So that's another important aspect about this. Not, I've already laid out all these issues, but who gets to control this, right? Who gets to control the geoengineering of our Earth's climate? Is it America? Is it China? Is it the UN? Who is it? And that power would be enormous, right? And what happens if you turn it off? What happens? You could go into termination shock. It's like, being dependent on, a medicine, and like, what happens if the political situation switches and like you just turn it off, or there's an economic crisis. And so there's huge implications in terms of who gets to control it and the impact on it. And there's these ideas you mentioned, like aerosols or space mirrors or things like that, and reflecting sunlight. But what happens if you are cutting off the needed sunlight for farmers in Africa or something like that, or you've disrupted the monsoons in India? So there's
because there's a balance, and we'd be disturbing that.
And you just have to think about doing one thing has this cause and effect, and you have to think all the way down the line.
Okay, so how the hell do we solve the climate crisis then, in your opinion? Like, what do we do?
Yeah, so ultimately we have to reduce the amount of the stuff that's causing it, which is the CO2 in the atmosphere. So we talked about sucking it out, but what about putting it in, right? So you got to stop putting it in. We gotta stop burning fossil fuels, and if we want to reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. So that's step one. And it's not just CO2. There's methane from cows. Yeah, from cows, rice paddies, landfills, fracking, things like that. There's nitrogen gases from fertilizers that are even more potent than CO2. There's a lot of greenhouse gases, but so we have to make sure we're emitting less of those greenhouse gases, and at the same time thinking about these solutions to draw it out. If we stopped emitting all greenhouse gases, it would eventually restabilize, right? It would take some time, but the oceans would absorb, the plants would absorb. It would take some time, but eventually we'd be okay. So. But we have to stop doing that if we want the climate to stabilize.
But do you think, as a whole, I know a lot of people out there still don't believe in climate change. Oh no! Firstly, when you encounter someone who doesn't believe in climate change, an educated person like a politician, because my view is when I hear politicians who don't believe in climate change, like sometimes you can look at them and wait a minute, this dude been to the best school out there, graduated the top of his class. He solely spitting bullshit for his lobbyist, just saying that. I mean, but how do you feel when you encounter a climate denier?
Well, it depends where they're coming from, right? If it's, it depends how, open-minded they are for, talking about it. Politicians are one thing, but oftentimes there's the politician and the person, and they're different. It's kind of like the actor, who plays a part on a screen, and they do it really well, and they're successful. And then at home, they're, just chilled out and laid back or whatever. Politicians are very similar. They have a role to play in their jobs, and then, they might be different as people. So it depends. You have to figure out where people are coming from, and I think it's not a political issue. It shouldn't be politicized. Everyone cares about their home, about each other, about their families, about their communities. And so I think if you can reach common values and figure out how it relates back to what's happening around the world, you can draw some common dialogue. There's different values for different people. Sometimes we think of conservative audiences as being very interested in family and technology and jobs and terrorism and and those aspects. And those are all connected to the environment and climate. And so if you can speak to values that appeal to certain audiences and relate it back, then you can have a conversation.
Okay, so there's a statistic that everyone quotes that 97% of scientists believe climate change is real. Have you ever run into any of the 3% that don't?
Yeah, they're all idiots. I mean, that's a scientific jargon. Let me explain what that means to you. And I'll just say that. We've reassessed their papers and they're totally screwed it up, and so it's actually now 100%. So it's not like a belief. It's there's no belief in science. There either is or there isn't. And so the science shows that climate's changing. And so one thing is that you also hear is that climate changes naturally, right?
Yeah, okay, because, look, not meaning to cut you off, because they were saying during, the Paleolithic era, there was more carbon in the air than there is now?
Yeah.
Okay, so explain, go on.
Yeah, and it was crazy hot, and you wouldn't want to live there, and you'd be stomped on by a dinosaur. So the climate has absolutely changed, naturally throughout the course of the birth of the Earth. The temperature goes up, temperature goes down, we get a little closer to the sun, we get a little further away, the solar cycles, and there's these natural bounds, and we've been tracking that. And we can track it for super long amounts of time. Now what's happened is that in recent times we've gone outside those natural bounds, outside those natural fluctuations, and that is the human fingerprint.
Okay. So I run into a friend or someone. What's the best way to explain to someone in simple terms, that climate change is real? Because you got to realize most people aren't necessarily sitting down listening to science guys like yourself. We are there watching TV, and you can have a group of people who say, well, hey, it's a hoax created by the Chinese.
Yeah.
So how do you explain to people in very simple terms that climate is real?
Yeah. Well, first off, I point them to this video and be like, check out the Skyy John video. This will explain it all to you, and then you'll know what's up. But again, it really depends on who the person is, right? There's no universal silver bullet that if I say this right thing, just suddenly everyone will get it, right? You have to, you really have to empathize and understand where people are coming from. What are their values? What do they know? What is their experience? Where can you find those connections? And it takes more than just the perfect words or the right facts or the right science. It really takes an empathetic understanding of individuals and their differences and their values to connect to them. And so, it depends. And, you also have to find out where they're getting their information from, right? You get a lot of denier talking points. And, there's ways to counter that. There's people who are just interested in the facts and the science. And there's people who don't read that, right? They don't hear it. You could tell them, the temperature's gotten warmer since last, year or 10 years or whatever. It's too jargony or too sciencey or too data. But if you tell them a story, it might be different. You'd be like, do you remember when you and your grandpa used to go, fishing, right? Back in the day, and there was all this fish, and the river was that high, and now it's not. Like, where are the fish? Where is the river? And then, suddenly, a way to communicate through just a story gets them to draw that link to, wait a second, what something is happening.
Okay, so the Amazon was recently on fire. And
still kind of is.
Okay, and they call that the Earth's lungs.
Yeah.
Is that an accurate representation?
Or
that's overhyped.
I love to use that. Some of my science colleagues say it should be the heartbeat, not the lungs.
Okay.
I'm like, it's the lungs. It breathes in the CO2 we breathe out, it breathes out the oxygen we breathe in.
So it's a big debate just which body part it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But some other scientists are like, no, it's like the heartbeat, it's like a thump thing. So I don't know. I still call it the lungs of the planet, even though a lot of my science colleagues are like, it's more like the heartbeat of the planet. But yeah, it totally breathes in the CO2 we breathe out and breathes out the oxygen we breathe in.
And it is shrinking. Like they are cutting down a lot of trees.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because you could see this with your satellites,
Easy.
right? And like at what rate is it disappearing?
Super duper duper fast. Yeah, it's fast, and it depends on like geopolitical situations and who's in charge in Brazil or the Congo.
But how do you go to what's his name, Bolsonaro, or what's his?
Yeah.
How do you tell him, hey, stop? You would need only the U.S. or some big country like the U.S. or the China could kind of demand that, right? And even still, that's an independent country. So how do you solve climate when you have so many different players who have so many different views? Because he's not a believer in climate science. As a matter of fact, I don't know that he doesn't believe, but there's a lot of money involved in what he's doing by spreading these farms out because they produce so much beef, right?
Sure.
So I mean, like, how do you even deal with a country like that?
I mean, ultimately, it's not about Brazil, but it's about every country, right? In every country, how do you deal with their decisions, especially if it hurts the environment or hurts the planet? Ultimately, it's about money and politics, right? There's a lot of money in politics everywhere, whether it's America or China or Brazil or wherever. There's a lot of money in politics. And so then where's the money coming from, right? Follow the money. And if the money's coming from an interest, a powerful interest against forests or against climate change, then that's how the politics roll.
Yeah, that's crazy when I look at Brazil. So if they were to stop all this burning, the slash and burn thing that they have going on down there, the forest would eventually return, right?
Yeah, that's a tough question, right? I mean, you're like, right, right,
Well,
right. Say yes, right.
You just side with that one. You're like,
yeah,
that's a tough one. That don't sound good,
Yeah, I can't be too positive about that answer because I mean positive as in not sure, but as in like happy. So you would think, all right, you chop down a tree in backyard, the seeds will drop and it'll grow up again. In the Amazon, the lungs of our planet, a lot of the sustenance of the Amazon rainforest is through recycling of water, right? Where's the water come from? It first comes off the Atlantic, right, and through storms. But those storms don't make it all the way into the Amazon. That's a big place, right? So it'll rain down, and then the trees will store that water, evaporate it out of those leaves, like we talked about before, create new clouds, new rain, and sustain it, right? So it sustains itself through this recycling of water. Rain comes down, it stores it, puts it back up. If you chop down the tree or the trees, there's nothing to retain that water anymore. When it rains, the water doesn't stay in the system. It just runs off into the rivers back to the ocean. And so you can't sustain yourself as an Amazon rainforest if you're chopping your water retention systems down and recycling systems down. So it's not clear that that the Amazon rainforest can fully recover. You might reach this tipping point in which you just don't have that water anymore.
Wow. Okay, that
Who wants a drink? Go to Tipsy Bartender, and we'll,
One of the things with this whole climate science right now is a lot of I've seen on the news recently is that as these glaciers melt, they're releasing viruses that have been trapped there for thousands of years, millions of years.
Yeah, sure.
So
that's fun, right?
Okay, would these be viruses that our ancestors are already immune to, that were trapped? Or these are viruses that humans have no ability to deal with?
Yeah, we don't know. We hear about like, oh yeah, the ice is thawed and we found this unfrozen caveman, and how cool is that? And there's a spear or whatever. But guess what? It's not just the caveman. There's the caveman diseases, right? And so we kind of forget about that unlocking. It's cool at first, and then you're like, ooh, go freeze yourself again. So back in the freezer, right? Yeah, we don't know. I mean, there's like these ancient viruses, the giant viruses that have been trapped for millennia that are now becoming exposed that we haven't, it's opening Pandora's box, right? waking that sleeping dragon, what's under there, and like it could be all hell that breaks out, or it could be like whatever.
Okay. Wow, I can have a new disease. Well, it's an old disease.
Yeah, new disease, old disease, right? Yeah.
No one ever had it. Well, some people might have had it, but a bit way back. Okay. So, if you could put an estimate on this, okay, because when people talk climate science, everyone goes, okay, I believe you. How long do we have? Like, how long do we have at our current rate before we hit this tipping point where we're all royally screwed?
Yeah. Great question. And there are tipping points for all sorts of systems. We talked about the Amazon rainforest tipping point. At what point do you top the forest back that it can't sustain itself? There are tipping points that are very clear to see, you know, with the sea level rising. If you're an island nation and the sea level rises, you lose your nation. And those have already happened. Entire nations are moving off.
In the South Pacific, that's happening.
Yeah, off their islands. So those tipping points are already occurring before our eyes. So there's lots of tipping points, some occurring faster, some occurring slower. But we are already seeing them right now. And so in terms of how much time we have, we talked about agriculture earlier, water in California versus water in, say, the Middle East, or, you know, somewhere where there's, you know, fewer protections and buffers and financial safety nets. Those tipping points will occur faster than they will in other areas. So, it depends on the situation and the area.
Okay, you're a scientist, all right? Just moving away from you're a scientist, and now science is. Let me use the word sexy. Like before, if I say
Go on.
Before, if you said, "Hey, listen, I want to talk to a scientist," people would be like, no, that's boring. But science is like the in thing now. Why do you think that is? You think that have to do with like the Elon Musk types coming out? And
have you seen him dance? That's not sexy. I love Elon, but let's keep the headphones down a little. No, I don't know. It's it's people like you, right? It's people like you who are reaching out to scientists and others, and it's just I don't know why science is becoming more ubiquitous and sexy.
But you'd agree with that, right? That more people appear to be interested in what you guys have to say now as opposed to before?
I don't know. I think science has been sexy for a while, from Galileo to...
You're a scientist though, okay?
Yeah, right.
Yes, you can find Galileo sexy, but I'm going to be who?
Yeah, but at the time, right? People look to them for that was major, groundbreaking, society changing when we figured out that we revolve around the sun and the sun doesn't revolve around us. Science has always been a huge part of society. And, I think right now what is different in our age and very marked is, how a lot of your viewers and listeners are listening to this is technology, right? In information and data. And so we are in the big data, the big information age, information at the tip of a finger. And information, good information, typically comes from science, right? So you've got a lot more access to science. And so it provides interesting, fodder for shows like this. It provides interesting inspiration for artists, for movie makers. And so you now have science being connected to a lot more people because of the internet age that we live in.
What do you think the world would look like if we were all scientists? Maybe not at your level, but you understand. Have an appreciation.
Well, that is my world, right? At JPL, we're all a lot of engineers and stuff like that. Yeah, it's we're all pretty nerdy and introverted, and we won't look at each other, and we play Dungeons and Dragons in the cafeteria. It's kind of not, I don't know. Ultimately, Skyy, ultimately we are all scientists. We are born scientists. We are curious about the world. We are curious to dig up in the sand. We are curious what happens if we, poke that bug. And we get the science beat out of us, right, by the system. But it's still in there. And I think one of my main goals is to bring the scientist out of everybody and ask that what if. If everyone was a scientist or brought that scientist out of them, I think we would have a world where we didn't just necessarily take information fed into us and believe it. We would question it. We look for alternative hypotheses. We look for evidence. And science, if everyone was a scientist, we'd have, a world that was that could progress and advance technologically.
You think there'll be less
scientifically.
wars?
I don't know. Scientists are pretty mean to each other too. So like we
would still have a bunch of wars with a bunch of scientists running.
Scientists are punks too, you know, like you know. So I think that there's scientists. There's like, you know, scientists make bad decisions too, right? You
No,
know,
I agree with that, but I just think
life.
that you guys, I was looking up to y'all going, wow, they could actually get along. If scientists run the world, we'd all be at peace, you know, living in the future.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean we have scientist leaders, world leaders like Merkel in Germany.
She's a scientist?
Physicist.
Oh, I didn't know that. She's
Yeah.
a physicist.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's I think a few other major leaders, so we can look to those countries and
I
see.
didn't know she was a physicist.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
So I think so.
How would you get
fact check me.
how would you get a kid involved in science?
A
I don't have
kid?
any kids yet,
Yeah.
but one day, you know, I might. Hey, I can have a little one. How would you encourage a kid to get involved in science?
I mean, like I said, we're all born scientists, and kids are the natural scientists.
yeah, natural
right
like Fortnite, but
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, if you can get off that, right? They're out there experimenting, tinkering. What happens if I tip this ball? You know, what happens if I tip that fancy vase that my dad Skyy bought? You know, over. You know, how loud will he react? Let me record the decibel levels. You know, kind of thing. So, scientists are, kids are scientists, and I think that we want to keep encouraging that. We want to give them things to play with, data. We're getting kids to code at early ages so they can access bigger data sets. We're getting them to program robots. And so I think that what's important is to keep encouraging that in our school system because it'll benefit society, it'll benefit America, it'll benefit the world. And make sure that, we don't beat it out of them through rote memorization. You got to memorize all the organic chemistry elements, and you got to just memorize all the body parts, and you got to memorize it. It's all about understanding how the system works and keeping that alive.
you guys also work with SpaceX, right? Because
Sure.
you guys use their rockets now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's nice.
How's that been working out?
Yeah, great. SpaceX is awesome. I mean, Elon Musk dancing aside, they've been awesome. Before SpaceX came on the scene, we were launching off of Russian Cold War nuclear rockets that had been decommissioned, right? And
Why didn't you have your own?
Well, they were cheaper because Russia built a heck load of them, and they stopped using them. So
Okay.
So then there was an interest in investing in American technology, and SpaceX came along and really stepped up to the plate. And there's other companies that do that as well. So.
But cost-wise, was SpaceX cheaper than working with the Russians?
SpaceX was not initially cheaper than working with the Russians, but now they are. And they've really reduced costs, especially because they can re-land their rockets. It used to be you just launch a rocket and dump it out into the ocean. Mm-hmm. Now you launch it, and it's almost like watching it in reverse. It goes and lands back down.
Yeah, I saw the simultaneous landing that blew my mind. Yeah,
and it's not because it's cool; it's because it saves a boatload of money, so to speak. SpaceX is doing well on this mission EcoStress that we launched to the space station. We went up on a SpaceX rocket, and the mission didn't have to pay for the launch. They were already contracted to resupply the space station with food and other experiments. So we just kind of, hitched a ride outside of Elon's, office and got a free ride to space, so to speak.
We were discussing this earlier. Okay, Elon Musk runs SpaceX, Tesla, I guess, Hyperloop, Neuralink, okay, all these companies that are doing these really, really big things. There's no way this dude could be running all these companies and really be hands-on. So that means that he has to find someone competent, and that guy's the one really calling the shots, right?
Or he doesn't sleep, and that's why he dances badly. I mean, it's like any business. There's a lot of really powerful business people that have a lot of businesses, and are they really involved in all their business? But he does it in serial a little bit too, right? He really built up, Tesla at first, and then once he kind of got that moving into SpaceX, and he says launching rockets is actually easier than producing cars. But the guy's our modern day Thomas Edison. He's a mover and shaker, and I'm really proud to kind of be able to connect to him now, and when we look back in the history books, he'll be right there, and that's cool, right?
That is cool. Josh, listen, man, thank you for sitting down with me and going over climate, and I can go out there and convince everyone, hey, this climate change thing is real. You need to start hitting people. People respond to that. Seriously. You don't believe in climate change? Boof!
Yeah.
You believe now? I believe.
That works, yeah.
Sometimes you have to force people to do stuff, okay?
You gotta do that, yeah.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. Or, we get a tipsy bartender drink, and let's have some drinks and talk it out.
Yeah. But I think you can still boil on us hitting them at some point.
Oh, yeah, we can. Bottom line, hit the people.
Hey, thank you very much, man, okay?
Yeah. Thanks.
Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Adios, mi gente. Nos vemos. See you next time.